back. This is BoomerLife on CL650.
Welcome back to the show. This is BoomerLife on CL650. I'm Joanne Sutton. We're having a discussion on advancing the knowledge of Alzheimer's disease today and other dementias, and we've just heard about the biomedical research being done at UBC. Now we're about to find out a little bit more about the clinical and behavioral aspects of dementia. Dr. Stuart McDonald joins us on the telephone. Hello, Dr. McDonald. Thanks for calling in.
Yeah, it's here. It's my pleasure.
Dr. McDonald has a PhD degree in lifespan psychology, and that was earned back in 2003. And since then has made scholarly contributions to the fields of cognitive aging and the cognitive neuroscience of aging. So, Dr. McDonald, it's wonderful to have you joining us on the phone today. You have an incredible biography of accolades in this department, but it seems that most of your experience and research has actually been done in focusing on the brain and aging. So, can you just tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I mean, my background, I guess, as an undergraduate, I was interested in memory specifically, and I was trained more as a basic experimental scientist, and I also had a passing interest in neuropsychology. So I knew that if I married those two things, that it would become an area of research that would only increase in importance in the coming decade.
Mm-hmm. It's all about timing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Dr. McDonald, tell us a little bit about this clinical stream of research that focuses on behavioral changes with dementia, and what types of things might be explored as part of it?
Sure, absolutely. So, as you just heard from Robin, the biomedical stream of dementia research is really focusing on the underlying causes of a disease like Alzheimer's. And in contrast, in my world, more of this clinical or behavioral research, we're interested in specifically that, the study of behaviors. So individual differences in memory performance, changes in ability to carry out everyday activities, and all of these behaviors then can actually help us improve diagnosis and treatment options. So based on the study of behaviors, we can use that information to try to identify which supports to provide to individuals, either living in the community or living in care facilities, to improve their quality of life.
So I understand that some of the research you've been engaged in concerns early detection. Can you talk a little bit about what that entails and maybe how you might differentiate that from diagnosis?
A probable diagnosis is really an expert judgment that's based on various sources of information, medical tests, tests of neuropsychological function, including memory tests, reports from family members, and so on. Almost like a
process of elimination.
It is, and there are certainly some things that you can target, but there are also many things that you have to eliminate. So you can have certainly a brain that appears to be riddled with the disease, but the brain is incredibly plastic. So clinically, you express some symptoms, but you can still function rather well. And that's one of the mysteries that we don't necessarily understand. And from the perspective of biomedical researches, as was just discussed in the earlier segment, there are really some incredible efforts, I would say, going on in terms of pursuit of underlying causes of diseases such as Alzheimer's. But for somebody in my research stream, the actual cause of the disease is only part of the equation. If we can improve our ability to detect individuals at risk as early as possible, we may be able to target effective interventions and perhaps delay the onset of the disease course a little bit, a year, 2 years, 3 years. And some recent data from both the Alzheimer's Society as well as the Canadian Institutes of Health Research suggests that simply focusing on this mission of delay rather than prevention or treatment, if you will, through pharmacotherapy is incredibly important. It might result in the next 20 plus years of 400,000 fewer Alzheimer's cases within Canada, and a savings projected to be as much as think it was $200 or $215 billion. So early detection and facilitating targeted intervention is critically important. And related to that, I guess to give you an example, if I knew what the risk factors were that were directly associated with the mechanisms of the disease, of course, I would focus my efforts there in terms of trying to target changes as early as possible. But in my world, we don't know that. So whether or not we call it a risk factor, which is a term I would use for something that is directly related to the mechanisms of the disease, versus a precipitating factor, which might be a stroke, for example, which isn't central to the disease but might hasten or quicken its onset, and other things that are mere correlates, things like depression, diabetes, stress. All of these things we know are associated with increased risk for Alzheimer's disease, but it's pretty unlikely that any of them are actual central mechanisms of the disease itself. The world of clinical research doesn't really, I shouldn't say we don't care about differentiating amongst those things, but it's of less importance. I think you can combine risk factors, precipitating factors, mere correlates in a multivariate melange. You can bring all of these things together, and in so doing, you can try to improve your ability to detect individuals who are at increased risk as early as possible.
Are there any true telltale signs that you know? Like, what should the average person be aware of?
Elevated stress, hypertension, sedentary lifestyle, depression, smoking. They're all potentially important contributors based on some of the work being done in North America. I would say physical activity from the perspective of the epidemiological research is probably one of the biggest risk factors.
And Dr. McDonald, how can people get involved in your research?
Well, we've had an ongoing study now for some period of time called the PREVENT study, which is really a study examining both risk as well as protective factors associated with transition from usual cognitive aging, as I talked about, to Alzheimer's disease. And they can get in touch with us at phone numbers 250-853-3839 or via email, and the email address is prevent@uvic.ca.
One question that I wanted to get to was about you talk about the research and the paramount conversation that's being had with boomers right now and their aging parents is moving them into residential care. Yeah. Because isn't that a strong portion of what you're doing?
It's really what we're up to right now. I've been fortunate enough to work with two specific teams in this notion with various health authorities in BC. One team is looking kind of at what the usual pathways are in terms of transitioning from home care through to residential care. Of course, in many residential care facilities, better than 50% of individuals in those contexts have some form of dementia. And the other stream is really focusing on this notion of aging in place. We're trying to identify what sorts of supports are necessary to help somebody successfully and safely remain within their current context rather than making that transition. As you're no doubt aware, the research is, it's rather stark. I think oftentimes making that transition, particularly when you're in a vulnerable stage, the consequences are often not good. Further declines can happen fairly quickly. And so we're looking at various suites of technologies. We have various types of sensors in the home for continuous monitoring. There's a tablet called Simple C that we're using that interacts with an individual with Alzheimer's within their own home. It can certainly send alerts to kids, much like the CareLink system and so on.
Well, Dr. Stuart McDonald, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your research details with us today and painting a picture of hope and promise for all of us. It's going to help create a more dementia-friendly community in the future. Thanks for calling in.
Thank you, Joanne, so much.
So bringing Maria Howard back into this conversation now, what does staying connected to research mean for the Alzheimer's Society? I know this is a very important factor for you.
Staying connected with research is so incredibly important, as you heard both Dr. McDonald and Dr. Shung share today. I think for us, it's ensuring that through our fundraising efforts, we continue to raise money to support these researchers. There is money coming in from many different places, but there just is not enough, and we have to really help get more dollars to the researchers. I think the other thing, as we've talked about a few times today, it's so important for people to speak up, share their stories, step forward, become involved in these clinical trials, and let researchers know what is the important thing that research should be focusing on. Because, again, as Dr. McDonald said, it's not just about the cure and some type of treatment. Those are very important, but there's a whole lot of other things that are important too in terms of people's quality of life and support, not just for the person living with the disease, but the family and the care partners around that person who also need lots of support to go along this journey. So just ask people to ask questions, remain involved.
Mm-hmm. And this is a natural spot to actually say thanks, Jim Mann, for his and
Absolutely.
your contributions today, because everything that Dr. Stuart McDonald just pointed out about behavioral research, and Dr. Robin Shung as well with clinical, supports the work that you've been doing as well.
Well, I think it's complementary. It really is. There's a lot of considerations when you talk about transitioning to residential care, or as Dr. McDonald talked about, the staying at home. They do talk a lot about better at home and so on. And there's a lot of areas to consider. Mm-hmm. It's easy to say, but it's much harder to do.
And I should mention again that the half marathon, the Scotiabank half marathon and 5K is coming up June 25th. Please mark that on your calendar if you want to participate. You can always volunteer, and you can always just go out and cheer everybody on. For more information, visit AlzheimerHalf.ca. Maria, thanks for joining us in the studio today.
Thanks again, Joanne.
And of course, for any further questions you have about Alzheimer's disease and other dementias, you can always speak with your family doctor, but know that there's always someone willing to help you at the Alzheimer's Society of British Columbia. You can call them, or you can visit the website at AlzheimerBC.org. We want to thank you for being part of the show today. This is BoomerLife on CL 650.